want to start with an issue Common Cause has been at the forefront of for decades, voting rights. Last year, Common Cause led a coalition of organizations in passing the Colorado Voting Rights Act. It codifies protections for voters in state law and creates legal pathways for them to challenge harmful election practices. With the recent Supreme Court decision, Louisiana v. Calais, what do you see as the role of the Attorney General in defending Colorado's voting rights and racial equity in state and local races? Hetal, why don't we start with you?
Sure. So actually, Louisiana v. Calais is not even the bottom of the barrel, right? A couple of days later, just a couple of days ago, the Supreme Court, in a shadow docket decision without accountability or transparency, just blessed the state that I grew up in naked attempt to disenfranchise Black and brown voters in that community. And so the issue with respect to voting rights couldn't be more exigent, it couldn't be more of a crisis, but it is also imminently dealt with at the state level in this particular moment, and here's how. So Colorado, in the incredible prescience of our state legislature and through incredible leadership of the state legislature, passed and things went into effect last August with respect to the Colorado Voting Rights Act. That made transformative changes in terms of protecting against a Supreme Court that's doing exactly the kinds of things it's doing right now. Number one, for example, for all of our LGBTQ plus community who is worried about the fact that they're not going to be able to vote with respect to discrimination on the basis of names and identity and perceived identity, the Colorado statute specifically protects against that, and the Attorney General can do something about that. Number two, an issue that is near and dear to my heart as someone for whom English is a third language and works with a lot of English as second and third language communities. This law in Colorado enshrines protections for language access, which is hugely consequential in this moment, particularly when it is tied to the issue of ICE agents at polling locations. The Attorney General can do something about that. In addition to that, there are broader questions about gerrymandering nationally that we will not face here in Colorado, and if we do, in a different way than certainly what we're seeing coming out of states like Alabama, Mississippi, Tennessee, and Georgia, right? But Colorado's Attorney General is a voice on the national stage to make sure that the right to vote is protected not just here in Colorado, but that Coloradans' values are also expressed on a national stage with respect to that gerrymandering issue. And so all of this is to say, thank you to our legislature and to Common Cause and to all the organizations that, again, had the foresight to get these protections into place, and this is the tip of the iceberg, but it is the job of the Attorney General to make sure that they're not just in place here in Colorado, but that we fight back against a federal government that tries to trump or supersede our laws, whether it's through legislative efforts through Congress or through the courts. And the place where that battle will be waged is the federal courts, both here in Colorado and across the country. And I am the only candidate in this race that has been inside the federal government for more than a decade, representing the federal government, knowing the limits of federal constitutional power. And so if that were to happen here in Colorado, the question is which Attorney General candidate can get down to the federal courthouse here in Colorado and fight for you quickly and effectively and can win. I would say that my track record and experience speaks for itself, and it would be my honor and privilege to represent you in court on those issues.
Thank you. Michael? What do you see as the role of the AG in defending Colorado's voting rights?
To protect voting rights is a top priority, and it has to be. We have to preserve our democracy, and that starts by protecting our elections. And the AG plays a critical role, and under my leadership, Donald Trump putting barriers up to keep disenfranchised voters disenfranchised. I'm going to knock each and every barrier down. People should have access to the ballots. We have to fight, and I will, to protect mail-in ballots. Those are safe and secure. Every single person in this room has voted with a mail-in ballot. Unless you want to reveal now you haven't voted, then we need to have a whole discussion. Even Donald Trump has used mail-in ballots. They are safe, secure, and legal, and I will defend them in court. Also making sure that people have the right to vote and are able to get to the ballot boxes to do exactly that. I will not allow ICE to be at the ballot boxes. I will not allow individuals with firearms to be anywhere near the ballot boxes. So I will uphold the law that we have in place here in Colorado. That's the kind of work I've been doing my entire career. So I've been doing Know Your Rights presentations for immigrants and on how to reduce gun violence and on protecting elections for years. Common Cause partnered with me last year to do a Know Your Rights training along with Colorado Ceasefire on those three areas, because that's what people need to know about our protections and then how we enforce those protections. I'm the one candidate who, as the head of the criminal section for the Attorney General's office, investigated election fraud cases around the state of Colorado. I'm the one candidate who's prosecuted election fraud. because I'm passionate about the integrity of our elections, including, and I'll tell you this quick story, there was a state house representative in Boulder County who was suspected of engaging in election fraud to keep her seat. And it was suggested to me when we found out that I should get the Weld County District Attorney, Republican Michael Rourke, to handle the case so I wouldn't have to go up against a fellow Democrat. But I immediately responded with, my job is to do justice without fear and without favor. Party affiliation does not matter. So my office investigated, I made the decision to file charges against her. She was convicted and removed from the state house as a result of my prosecution. That's what it means to fight for justice with integrity. By the way, she's now working for the candidate and on her campaign who's not here today. And if you're going to fight for election integrity, you should not have someone who was convicted of election fraud working on your campaign. I'm here to tell you that I'll always fight for justice and do it with integrity. So it means that has to be and will be under my leadership a top priority. Every barrier the Trump administration tries to put up, I will knock down, because that's how we preserve our democracy and lead to a better future for this country. Thank you.
Thanks, David.
Thank you. You know, this is a life or death issue right here in Colorado. This isn't just happening across the country, right here in Colorado. Let me tell you what I mean by that. So southeast Colorado Springs, a disproportionately Black and Latino community in El Paso County, has been systematically locked out of our elections process in this state, right? Denied the opportunity for decent representation on city council, decent representation on the county commission, as a consequence of all kinds of purposeful efforts to deny them their voice. And the consequences for them are apparent, right? They have, in Southeast Colorado Springs, I just read, a 10-year shorter life expectancy. 10 years shorter in Southeast Colorado Springs than the rest of Colorado Springs, right? Denied access to decent food, denied access to services, to healthcare, to public transportation. All traced back to the fact that they have city council elections in off years in April, right? To make sure that they can't show up to vote, right? That they don't show up to vote. All traced back to the fact that they've got a rigged scheme, in my perspective, at the county commission level, where we've got a bunch of at-large representatives and no meaningful representation for those districts. The Colorado Voting Rights Act, developed and advocated for by Common Cause, provides a blueprint for how we can fight back, right? How we can support them. And that's work that I am going to take immensely seriously as Attorney General. Standing alongside communities, using the authority that the Attorney General has under the Colorado Voting Rights Act to hold municipalities, to hold counties accountable if we need to. Now, I'm not saying that the goal here is to run around and litigate every single case, and I hope that we don't actually need to litigate the Colorado Springs case through final judgment. I hope that Colorado Springs comes to its senses, moves its municipal elections, for example, to the fall on even-numbered years. Something that's pretty straightforward that we've been able to figure out for decades and decades in other parts of the state. I share all of this just to highlight how important this office is in fighting for the future of our democracy right here in Colorado. And it's not just about the threats coming from Washington, although those are substantial ones. It's sometimes the threats coming right here from home. I think we need a lawyer in this office who is not afraid of those fights. I've dedicated my career to holding accountable Democrats and Republicans at the state level here, at the local level here, whether it's Jared Polis trying to share confidential private information with ICE, or the Garfield County Sheriff openly suggesting that he'll collaborate with ICE, endangering immigrant communities. Going to federal court and state court, standing up to the largest private prison contractor in the country, using all of the tools of the law in bold and courageous ways to take on these fights. The fight for our democracy is a life or death fight, and we're seeing it play out right here in Colorado. Thank you.
Thank you. The Trump administration is launching a multitude of preemptive attacks on the administration of a free and fair election in 2026. There are concerns about weaponization of federal troops at the polls, the withholding of Colorado's mail ballots, and refusals to accept the results of Colorado's election. Please tell us how you are evaluating these threats and, in the wake of election chaos, how you would approach your role as the AG. Michael?
Trump is doing this in an effort to rig the election. That's why he's doing these things. And the only defense we have is the rule of law. The Attorney General is on the front lines of that fight. You need an Attorney General who has a proven track record as a fighter and a leader and as a prosecutor for justice. Not just criminal justice, but civil justice, economic and environmental justice, and racial justice. Who's going to stand up and defend our democracy by defending our elections. I will not allow ICE to go near the ballot boxes. We will take them to court and stop that from happening. Just as I will take ICE to court and demand that they take down their mask. They should not be wearing masks and denying transparency and accountability to community members around this country as they terrify and terrorize immigrants in our communities. I've worked on cases throughout my entire career that were horrific and difficult and intense with outstanding women and men in law enforcement who did not wear masks. So the King Soopers mass murder, Pearl Street firebombing, gang homicides back in New York City. The wearing a mask by ICE is to deny us accountability and transparency. And when it comes to our elections, taking Trump to court and being proactive about it and making sure that we take the fight to them and not just be simply reactive. Too many people were caught flat-footed when the Trump administration came back in for a second time. I promise you I will not be. It's why when Trump took office for the second time, my immigrant protection program, we're the only district attorney's office in the state that has an immigrant protection program, we ramped it up to make sure people know what their rights are in the community and that we will enforce those rights. It's why I go out in the community with leaders in Boulder County law enforcement to say when ICE comes to town, I will prosecute them. When ICE comes to town, call 911. Law enforcement will protect you. It's about having those partnerships and having that experience and making sure that we demonstrate to the people of Colorado and to Donald Trump that no one is above the law. The law is the only defense we have right now. So birthright citizenship, the U.S. military being asked to police our cities, the only reasons those things were not in effect immediately is because attorneys general standing up and fighting in court, and we have to win those fights. It's not enough to take a case to the U.S. Supreme Court and lose 9-0. It's about taking the cases to court and winning those fights, and that's what I'm committed to doing when it comes to protecting our democracy.
Thank you. David?
Thanks so much. If you'll allow me to channel my father for a second, what he said about this project was, this is some scary shit, you know? And it is. This is bad. A couple of things that I really want to highlight. First, we are going to have to use the levers of the law in new kinds of ways, in ways we haven't before, to address these new kinds of threats. So yes, that's going to mean, you know, continuing to stand up to the Trump administration when it engages in clearly lawless efforts to undermine our democracy, as Attorney General Weiser is right now, for example, joining with several other states in litigation in the District of Massachusetts to take on the president's efforts to take away our mail-in ballots. It's also going to mean holding accountable the individuals, and using state law to do it, the individuals who try to corrupt our democracy. Because Donald Trump and the corrupt Supreme Court have given the president absolute immunity over the commission of crimes, even under state law, that developed in case law following his efforts to undermine the elections in Georgia. But other individuals inside federal government don't have that same absolute immunity. So Stephen Miller, you corrupt our elections, you violate Colorado state law, we're gonna prosecute you under state law. Right? Those are big cases. Those are hard cases. They are cases that we haven't had to fight before. But that's the work that I've been doing my entire career, standing up to the Trump administration, holding accountable private prison companies and the biggest corporations in the world under the antitrust laws, under the consumer protection laws, and others, fighting and winning fights that they said we couldn't win. Second, I also just have to identify here that this fight is not going to be won ultimately in the courtroom. The thing that's going to save this democracy is the only thing that ever has: the power of people to come together and fight to save our future. Right? So, as I love to point out, in Minnesota, ultimately, what staved off the lawless paramilitary ICE invasion was a general strike. Unions and working people coming together and shutting stuff down. But Minnesota has almost 3 times the private sector union density of Colorado. That's why when Governor Jared Polis says that he wants to stand up to Donald Trump by hashtag fighting for our democracy while vetoing the Worker Protection Act, which would make it easier for workers to unionize, I think he's doing something fundamentally corrosive to the future of our democracy.
Thank you. Hetal?
So it's not surprising that the three of us are going to agree on a number of these issues. This is one of them, which is to say that when Donald Trump engages in the politics of chaos and confusion, that we have to show up, we have to be intentional, thoughtful, organized, and ready, right? And so this question, the prompt was, what are you doing to evaluate these threats? We have to have a plan. And the plan has to be thought out in terms of the legal theory and execution on that legal theory. That state attorneys general have filed a lawsuit in Massachusetts, as David mentioned, in terms of mail-in ballots. But I'll tell you, there's already a precursor to that lawsuit, and it was in the District of DC. And Carl Nichols, a federal judge there, said there was not enough to or to grant something called a preliminary injunction there because of a technical standing issue, right? This illustrates that the fragility of our rights is going to depend upon an attorney general that has the ability to execute on making sure that the arguments that are made are going to win in federal court. That matters more than ever. And so it will not surprise you to hear that whether it's ICE at polling locations, whether it's mail-in ballots, whether it's canceling UPS's or USPS's ability to deliver mail-in ballots, all of that fundamentally sounds in a "we will see you in court." And as we all agree, that every single time this administration has been challenged in court, whether it's sending the National Guard out or whether it's violating the Fourth Amendment in terms of lawless and lack of probable cause before using a battering ram to walk into someone's house, this administration is losing. The reason that we have lost the thread on this is because they are engaging in a politics of chaos where they think that if they undermine our democracy in paper cuts, as they view it, that they're somehow going to win. We can't let that happen. But I want to take a bigger step back because I think the really interesting part of your question in terms of the future, Shaun, is about the statements that are going to be made about this election being rigged by this administration when they lose, and they will in November of this year. To me, that points to a much bigger problem in society that we have right now, which is we cannot agree on a common set of facts. What is truth in this particular moment? And so that is something that requires the Democratic Party in this particular moment to step up and say, how is it that we are fighting for a future where there is more independent journalism, where there is more fact-verified information that is out there, where social media companies that push and use algorithms to push disinformation are held accountable for that? That is ultimately the hearts and minds question about protecting our democracy. We can take all these cases to court and we will win, as I've said. Historically, the Trump administration has lost far more than they have won in the last 18 months, but yet we are more divided than ever. No one feels like they are protected in this moment, and no one knows what the path ahead is. And so I think that after this election this November, we are going to see that get worse and not better, and I am an Attorney General candidate who is prepared on day one to continue to hold big tech companies accountable as I have historically, because that is the place where the marketplace of ideas is coming from with respect to this issue of what is our democracy and how is it that we are operating from a different set of facts in this particular moment.
It's a great segue into our next topic, artificial intelligence. Law enforcement agencies across Colorado have increasingly entered into contracts with companies like Flock and Axon that provide video, audio, and location-based surveillance. The legislature considered a bill earlier this year, SB 70, to put guardrails around the use of this technology, but the bill failed. With data leaks, unclear language on data privacy and ownership, and fears over coordination with the Trump administration, especially ICE, do you believe that mass surveillance technology, including Flocks and Axon, should be more heavily regulated, and if so, how? David?
Thank you. A lot of complicated pieces to this question, but let me say first that I believe that the way that license plate reader technologies are being used right now in Colorado is unlawful under the Colorado Constitution. Our Fourth Amendment here in Colorado, our privacy protections are broader than federal constitutional privacy protections. And I think that, and there's litigation that is now starting to emerge on this question that I support. Even in some federal courts have said that the mass dragnet surveillance that we're now seeing from license plate reader technologies, capturing hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of data points on all of us all the time, data that can be shared with ICE, data that can be shared with out-of-state prosecutors going after women seeking abortions, reproductive care in Colorado, data that can be shared with corporate powers, right, that can spy on us to jack up our prices and drive down our wages, work that I've been doing my entire career, that this kinds of mass surveillance poses serious federal constitutional questions. I think there should be very little question that sharing this information with, certainly with law enforcement who does not have a warrant violates state constitutional protections. And I'll say that this fight is an essential one. It's one that I think we can find a lot of political consensus around. That bill that failed in the legislature, which among other things would have required law enforcement to obtain a warrant, before accessing this information, that bill died because Democrats helped to kill it. Democrats right here in Colorado, some of the same Democrats, right, that have been in collaborating with some of the dark and corporate money that's flowing into our elections here in Colorado. The next day, Representative Lauren Boebert introduced a bill in Congress to require law enforcement to obtain warrants before seeking this information. I think all of us should be very deeply concerned about the marriage of the big tech oligarchs and law enforcement at the federal, state, and local level in this country. This would be a top priority of mine as your next Attorney General.
Thank you. I interviewed Representative Boebert about her bill that she's
That
carrying
must
with
have been fun.
Representative Massey, and she talked about how she, a sitting member of Congress, was surveilled for a year by the Department of Justice.
Yeah.
So this happens. People think that it's just surveilling people who are committing crimes, but it goes far beyond that. Hetal, do you want to address this and maybe factor in your answer the fact that the Trump administration has tried to put a moratorium on any regulation of AI?
Of course they have, right? Yes, be happy to address that as well. So look, I am someone who believes, and as a former criminal prosecutor who's had to get warrants to engage in the type of information gathering that is pursuant to probable cause, the idea of mass surveillance is anathema in terms of the broader question of our Constitution, right? And so I happen to think that this is the same issue. It's the tail wagging the dog in terms of the concentration of power of a few companies that have access to all this information, and then suddenly they are in bed with a federal government to say, we will sell you this information, we will give you this information as long as you don't crack down on us. That is the nature of corruption and of abuse of power, and that is what we are seeing day in and day out. I am the lawyer who led the case that successfully held Google to account for monopolization of the search industry, right? When we say, oh, I Googled it, that didn't happen by accident. That was a result of Google engaging in anti-competitive conduct, illegal conduct, as it turns out, in order to make sure that you don't have other options. And so why does that matter in relation to this question? It matters because once you have an organization that has fealty to an administration, it doesn't matter if it's a Democratic administration or a Republican administration, all the guardrails are out the window. And so one of the arguments that we made in federal court about that issue was to say suddenly it will be Google that decides whether Planned Parenthood ends up on page 1 of the search results when someone says, I have an unplanned pregnancy, or page 3. That is the theory of the case, and that is how we won that case to hold Google accountable. We have to continue to do that with respect to mass surveillance because of the deleterious and deeply impactful ways in which our society is undermined by it. Now, the AI moratorium. Of course, this administration wants an AI moratorium for a lot of different reasons. Number one, it's about power and being able to leverage power from organizations that then turn around and make contributions so that a ballroom can be built. But number two, it feeds on this idea that, oh, there's a fetishization of this, and like AI is so complicated, we have to handle it at the federal level. So look, I am someone who believes that we need to be responsible, thoughtful, and really intentional about how we make sure that the benefits, whatever they are, of AI are leveraged in whatever capacity people say that they will exist, but to make sure that all of our laws that we have historically seen, to make sure that our jobs, our ability to access housing, all of that are fairly interpreted. There is nothing new under the sun in terms of why AI should get a special pass or treatment with respect to those issues. And so the federal government trying to impose a moratorium, which, by the way, then was pushed back on, right, in terms
Yes.
of both parties, right, understanding the incredible danger that could exist if AI companies are allowed to completely operate without any rules of the road, which is the alternative. And so Colorado is to be commended in the fact that we have waded into the AI fight to try to protect our people, to make sure that our systems of government work. But most importantly, like, let's not lose sight of the fact that this isn't just about AI. It is about companies that harvest and generate data and then hoard that data for financial profit. And that is the core, whether it's Axon and Flock or anything else, Palantir, anything else, in terms of the future and the dystopian future we face in terms of fighting our own government, in terms of our own information and data.
Thanks. You know, Michael, the bill at the Capitol failed in large part due to the opposition from law enforcement, who have said this is so critically important, this technology, in terms of catching the bad guys.
So let me answer the question directly and then take a step back. So the direct answer is yes, there should be regulations and restrictions on law enforcement using this technology, and I was outspoken in my opposition to their position on that bill, because we should have some restrictions in place. And quite frankly, having led the effort last year to expand immigrant protections in the state of Colorado, taking what we have in Boulder County under my immigrant protection program statewide, I helped lead the effort to get the Senate bill passed last year. Law enforcement is prohibited from assisting or cooperating with ICE absent a court order. So them giving ICE any access to their Flock system or license plate reader, to me, is a direct violation of the law I just helped get passed. We should never allow ICE to have that kind of access and use it for immigration enforcement. And there should be more regulations in place. And law enforcement should be held accountable when they violate those regulations. And I'm the one person in this race who has successfully prosecuted police officers. Starting with shortly after 9/11, I was in downtown Manhattan on 9/11 getting ready to give an opening statement in a robbery trial when the first plane hit. And one of the cases that I got from that day was a police officer smashed a Middle Eastern man in the face with his police radio simply because he was Middle Eastern. I prosecuted that case, justice was done, the officer was convicted, he is no longer and will never be a member of law enforcement. That's the kind of work I've done in my entire career. There are 2 sheriff's deputies from Boulder County sitting in state prison while we sit here because we prosecuted them for killing a young man in their custody. I prosecuted a sergeant from the sheriff's office from the jail for tasing a black man in custody. That's what it means to do justice without fear and without favor. We have to make sure that we have those restrictions in place so people can live their lives. But I want to take a step back because the danger is partly what my friend Hetal just talked about too, and I think David touched on it in fairness, which is we're all very respectful to one another if you haven't picked up on that yet. But it's the mega corporations collecting this data and using it when they do rent algorithms. We're deciding what the price is going to be when you pull up to the gas pump, or you pull up to the gas pump, or you pull up in your Tesla, Danielle, to the gas pump. Just kidding. But here's the point. These AI systems and the mega corporations are putting profit over people. We just saw Governor Polis veto one of the bills that would have put more protections in place. Governor Polis, who's been on quite a roll, by the way, vetoed the bill that would have put protections for consumers and data privacy in place in the state of Colorado. I say he's been on a roll because he just commuted the sentence of Tina Peters, which was an absolute miscarriage of justice. She abused her office, she engaged in public corruption, and she undercut the integrity of our elections when we need that more than ever. The district attorney who prosecuted that case, Dan Rubenstein, who's endorsed my campaign for Attorney General, fought for justice in that case. She should still be in state prison because of what she did. She's out because of a 2-tiered justice system where she's a political crony of Donald Trump, and that's the only reason she got the special attention of the Trump administration, and why Governor Polis bent the knee and caved to the pressure. But when you cave to a lawless bully, whether it's a president or a mega corporation or any member of law enforcement, they don't suddenly change their ways and do the right thing. They keep coming. And I promise you I'll always fight for what's right and stand up and fight against whomever it is that's threatening Colorado and violating the law. Thank you.
Thank you. We're going to switch gears and talk about federal overreach. Federal law enforcement agencies, including the U.S. Department of Justice, ICE, and FBI, have been accused of violating federal and state laws and trampling civil rights. What tools does the Attorney General's office have to push back against this? And as Attorney General, how will you do so to protect Coloradans' legal and civil rights? Hetal, you're up first.
So this is a place where my background and expertise is uniquely valuable, right? I am the only candidate in this field that spent more than a decade inside the Department of Justice, back when the Department of Justice observed the idea that you do the right thing for the right reasons in the right way. The Department of Justice is named the Department of Justice. It is the only cabinet agency that is named after a value or a virtue, a pursuit or a quest, and that used to mean something. I resigned a year ago in part because of these issues that were raised by Shaun, but also because I was a senior political appointee of the last administration, and my options were either to resign or to be fired by President Trump at 12:01 on January 20th. I wouldn't give him that satisfaction, of course. And so here's what I will tell you. As your next Attorney General, and you may have seen a bunch of articles across the country, but there was one in the New York Times this past week, about a week ago now, that talks about how 10,000 lawyers have left the federal government and are now flocking to lots of different institutions, including the state AG's offices. The Office of Colorado Attorney General was in fact highlighted and profiled in that piece by the New York Times. Phil Weiser has hired 22 former feds, many of them that were in my former office, that were my mentees or people that I worked with. And the reason for that is that the way that we hold these federal agencies accountable is through expertise from the people who know those systems from the inside out. I am the one candidate who can claim that in this race, and am ready on day one to fight for you in terms of understanding the limits of federal constitutional power as they relate to any of those agencies. But second, all of us are going to say we're going to fight hard in terms of these institutions. We're going to go to court. We're going to take them to court early and often. But I think some of this has to be the case, that we have to have a deterrent effect with respect to this administration and those agencies coming to Colorado and viewing whoever is sitting in this seat as a credible threat to the agenda that they're trying to jam down our throats illegally and unlawfully here. And that matters a lot in terms of who you have in that Attorney General seat. It matters a lot in terms of coalition building, not just here in Colorado, but across the country with other AGs to take on that fight. The place where AGs have been most successful in holding this administration to account with respect to that issue has been when they have banded together in large coalitions, and that is something that I am uniquely well situated to do. And so the bottom line, in my opinion, to this question in terms of how you hold those agencies to account is you have no quarter here in Colorado. That's the key. They need to understand, number one, that when we file and litigate against them, that we'll win, and number two, that they don't want to take on that fight, that they should look elsewhere. We have also seen that negotiating with them is not really an outcome that works for us, right? And so I don't think that anyone who tries to sell you an answer or a perspective on this that's other than the hard ground work of fighting up that hill is being honest with you or honest with themselves about the overall landscape we face ourselves in this moment. And so this is going to take a lot of boots on the ground, but I am well situated to lead those boots on the ground on a particular area of expertise that matters right now.
Thanks, Michael.
Having been a prosecutor and a leader at the State Attorney General's office, there are a couple things we could do to answer your question directly. One is civil enforcement of the law. So last year, the bill I helped get passed, Senate Bill 276, to expand immigrant protections throughout the state of Colorado, included provisions where the Attorney General can bring a civil action against any member of law enforcement that assist ICE, or against ICE whenever they violate the state law. So a good example would be Mesa County Sheriff's deputy pulls over a young woman coming from Utah traveling on I-70 to Metro Denver area. He pulls her over for a traffic offense and then conspires with ICE via text message so that they pick her up a few miles down the highway and she's being taken into custody for an immigration violation by ICE. That is a direct violation of the state law that we got passed here in Colorado. Attorney General Phil Weiser did a great job of bringing a civil suit against that sheriff's deputy. He's no longer in law enforcement as a result. That's the role of the Attorney General, because that sends a loud and clear message to law enforcement that regardless of their views on immigration, they may have a different view, but they have to follow the law. And you need an Attorney General with the experience and the fight and the passion to make sure that we stand up and do exactly that. The other part of it is criminal prosecution and making sure that we criminally prosecute ICE whenever they commit crimes in the state of Colorado. And I've been very outspoken about this because I'm committed to doing it, having done this kind of work my entire career as a prosecutor and as a leader in the Manhattan DA's office, Colorado AG's office, and as the elected district attorney of Boulder County. But that leads to my final point, which is I'm already doing it. Standing up against ICE is what I've been doing for the past 8 years. Because quite frankly, we talk a lot about Trump, and we should, because it's an existential crisis. But both parties have failed to deliver comprehensive immigration reform. That DA immigrant protection program that I talked about leading since 2018, we didn't put that on pause during the Biden administration. It's It's about protecting immigrants in our community, making sure that we have the protections in place that make sense so that victims of domestic violence and sex assault can come forward without fear they're going to be deported as a result of coming forward. My commitment is to doing justice and upholding public safety for all. That's why I've had that immigrant protection program in place. So 2 weeks ago, and you may have seen the article about this, I got a letter from Congress, from a committee led by Jim Jordan, and my assistant came in and said, "Did you see the letter from Congress? They just emailed you." I said, "Good letter?" She's like, "No, I put this in the not a good letter category." And indeed, it was them demanding several things from us, trying to intimidate me into shutting down our immigrant protection program. I will not back down. I'm proud of that program, and I'm proud of the fact that Boulder County law enforcement is united with me in that effort, and that's how I responded to that letter just earlier this week. And now the battle is on. But the fight's been on for years, so for me, this isn't a what I'm gonna do as Attorney General. That's certainly part of it. But really, the answer is I'm gonna keep doing exactly what I've been doing my entire career, and that includes standing up and fighting against the federal government when they're violating the rule of law and harming people in this great state. Thank you.
To make it easier to prosecute these cases, the legislature had a bill that failed, SB 176, that would have expanded the ability to prosecute federal law enforcement officers in state courts for violating federal law, where you have a better shot at that. How do you do better? How do you know, as AG?
I appreciate the question so much, and one of the things that I want to highlight here is how dire the stakes are and how we need to use all of the tools that we have and all of the levers of power that we have to fight for people. Right? I've got clients right now locked up in Immigration Detention Center, a private prison camp owned by an out-of-state billion-dollar corporation. People have been stripped away from their kids, mommies and daddies stripped away from their kids because they look Latino, because they speak Spanish, because they work a low-wage job. When, you know, every day that I had with my dad was precious, it's atrocious. When I've got clients across Colorado who are afraid to call 911, how dangerous is that to all of us? I've got a client several months ago who told us that her boss said the next time she asks for her paycheck, she'll get a bullet in the head and a call to ICE. We need to use all of the tools of the law to fight for our future here in Colorado. So first, this is the work that I've been doing my entire career, even in the face of lots of folks telling us that it was impossible to do. When we filed that case against the GEO Group on behalf of tens of thousands locked up in our Immigration Detention Center, our private prison camp right here, just a couple miles from here in Aurora, people said that case was impossible. People said, lawyers on the other side said that they would come for our bar licenses, right? That's how unheard of these cases were, right? But we just won in the United States Supreme Court. That case is headed to trial. And we worked with state AGs, including the Washington State AG, which took on litigation that followed from that case. It's why I've been seeking to hold accountable local law enforcement here in Colorado, and even the governor himself, when he tried to collaborate with ICE and do the bidding of the Trump administration and its absurd and cruel project. When I'm Attorney General, I'm going to be banging on the door at GEO Group with a subpoena in my hand. You know, let us in. We need to make sure that the people in that facility eating moldy food, being denied access to health care, are being treated in accordance with state law. And you know what? We are not going to win every single one of those fights in court, but we're going to have to fight every single one of those fights. And we can't be afraid to do it, even if no state AG has done it before. Right? That's why I was the first Attorney General candidate in the country this cycle to call for prosecuting ICE agents when they violate our rights. With respect to my colleagues, right? But I did it before Minnesota, right? Before Minnesota. It's really important that we see threats to our democracy before they are on the nightly news. Now, with respect to what happened in the legislature this year, I'm deeply disappointed by the efforts of some to fight back against the No Kings Act, which would have very simply allowed us to hold federal officers, including ICE officers, accountable in state court when they trample our constitutional rights. The ways in which state officials can already be held accountable under Section 1983 in federal court. All it would say is that federal officials are not above the law. Nobody is. I think it's absolutely essential that we elect an Attorney General that will be guided by that principle. Nobody is above the law, especially when it comes to protecting our most marginalized. If you'll allow me just one second thing, my daughter once watched one of these forums, and she said, "You went through that whole forum and you never once talked about trans kids who are right now being discriminated against and harmed. And just because there aren't many trans kids doesn't mean you shouldn't talk about them. It means you should talk about them more so they hear you." And so I want to do right by her here too. We've got the rights of our LGBTQ plus community that are absolutely getting trampled here in Colorado. One of the points that I want to make here, which I think applies to the work of protecting immigrants too, is it's not just about fighting back against the Trump administration, it's also about taking on the forces right here in Colorado, the institutions that are doing the bidding of the Trump administration by acquiescing to their pressure campaign. For example, Children's Hospital and Denver Health cutting off gender-affirming care to trans kids, and the governor, trying to collaborate with ICE, and bosses using the threat of ICE to steal people's wages. This is a fight we have to be taking on right here at home too.
Thank you. I'd like to ask you all about the qualifications for Colorado Attorney General. Jena Griswold, who, as you know, declined to participate in this forum, is considered the front runner. She has said the Office of Attorney General is a job to oversee and set Colorado's legal policy. It is not a chief prosecutor's job or chief trial attorney's job. Griswold's campaign admits she has only represented one client in family court 14 years ago in DC before she passed the bar there. How important do you think it is for the Attorney General to have legal and litigation experience? Who's up first? Michael?
Actually, don't remember.
I don't even, is it you, Hetal? Okay.
Yes.
Is it Hetal?
Oh, someone's giving you
Okay, it's Hetal.
It's me?
Oh, great. All right. Experience in litigation and courtroom experience, yeah?
Is it
Okay.
important? How important?
In short, yes, of course. How can you credibly be the state's chief law enforcement officer and the state's lawyer if you can't say, I'm going to lead in the way that I have done, right? I think it is an astonishing thing to say that I am entitled to be in a position of leadership, to have the privilege and honor to lead public servants who could make so much more money elsewhere and work far fewer hours, but show up every single day because they care about the mission and want to do good and right. How dare you say that it is not important to have the experience that they are building in order to lead them? So no, I don't think it is sufficient to say my brand of leadership will be a figurehead form of leadership. I tell you what to do and you go out and execute on it. I have never found that to be a particularly compelling management philosophy, and it is fundamentally at odds with how I, in the government, have led, in my last role, 800 plus lawyers, professional staff, cases of a lifetime that everyone says are so tough and so hard, right? And I want to take a step back. Obviously, you can see that this gets me agitated because I think that politics and the real world are often really separated. This is something that, as a first-time candidate, I feel like I have some visibility into, right? You have the common sense test that you experience in the real world, and then you have the political answers you hear, and you scratch your head and say, that doesn't square. But here's the step back I want to take. I think it is a straw man argument. I think it is a tactical strategy to say you don't have to be a trial lawyer to be the Attorney General. That's not the argument I'm making. I'm making the argument that you have to be an experienced lawyer, understanding the laws that you are implementing, the ways in which they are prosecuted, the subject areas. And that doesn't always mean that you have to be the one who is standing at the podium, although it sure does help when you're trying to get a case ready for the United States Supreme Court or issues of their first kind. But it means that you have to meaningfully engage with the law as a lawyer. That's the distinction to be made. And so in a time where our public institutions are receiving the lowest trust ratings ever, and our public leaders don't have the faith and confidence of the people because they see a bunch of backroom deals and whatever ends up happening in terms of now it's your turn to be in this job and now it's your turn to be in this other job, I think we all need to take a step back and make the important point that experience may not be the most politically sexy tagline, but it is the only thing that separates winning and losing of our democracy in this moment, and that is why it matters.
Thank you. Michael?
So yes, experience matters a lot, and so does integrity. Shaun Boyd is an outstanding reporter who shines a light on things throughout the state of Colorado, and I'm a big fan of hers. So much so that I'll tell you, when you go home later, you should type in Shaun Boyd Jena Griswold experience into Google and see the story that comes up. Because it's not just about experience, but it's also telling the truth about one's experience. That's why I show up for these candidate forums. And I think that's why Hetal and David show up as well, to answer your questions about our experience. So the answer is, for me, heck yes. Take a step back and think about the description of the Attorney General. What's the job of the Attorney General? It's not senator, it's not governor, it's not state treasurer, and it's not secretary of state. The Attorney General is the top lawyer, the chief law enforcement officer for all of Colorado, the people's lawyer. The people's lawyer is going to stand up in court and fight for what's right. That includes when your staff comes to you and says, should we file a lawsuit against Donald Trump? The Attorney General sure as heck has to be the one answering that question, not saying go talk to the person who's practiced law before. The Attorney General has to be the one with that responsibility. And those decisions are so critical that we get them right. Taking Trump to court and losing 9-0 in the U.S. Supreme Court wastes taxpayer dollars and throws away the confidence and trust of the people that we serve. So you'd have to know how to fight and win and lead. That's the second part of it. The Attorney General supervises, leads, and inspires 724 public servants. And having worked there, I can tell you they all have the opportunity to go work in private practice and make so much more money. They choose to be in public service because they believe in the mission and the leadership of the office. In my office, the District Attorney's Office of Boulder County, I still try cases because I think if you're going to be a leader, you should be willing to do the work you ask of others. So the last trial I had was this past December. A fire department captain who sexually assaulted 5 women working under his command. He used his authority to victimize all 5 of them, including a 17-year-old intern. I took that case to trial. He was convicted of all charges and sentenced to 55 years to life. That's what it means to stand and fight for justice. You have to be willing to do the work yourself. But it's also why I'm able to give my staff the inspiration and the instruction to do the right thing on their cases, because I know how to do the job. When Antonia and I were at the Manhattan District Attorney's Office and I was offered the opportunity, I thought it was just an offer, but I was offered the opportunity to join the executive staff and lead the entire office of 1,300 people. I told the elected district attorney, I said, I have one request. He said, this is not a negotiation. This is me telling you have a promotion and you saying thank you. I said, no, my one request is that I still be able to handle cases. Because if you're going to be a leader, you have to be willing to do the work. And I have to be able to tell people how to do it. That's how I've always led. By empowering people to do the right thing, but also knowing how to do it myself. The next Attorney General has to know how to win the fights in court and has to lead an office of 724 public servants in that fight, which also requires us to set priorities. How many attorneys are we going to have assigned to take on Trump? How about our environment, our water, mental health issues, gun violence, public safety, civil rights? Those are where leadership qualities matter a lot, but it's also about integrity. And I will always be direct and honest with the people of the state of Colorado. Thank you.
Thank you. David?
Michael said, heck yes, and I'm going to spice it up a little bit. I'm going to say hell yes. There you go.
That's
I know.
usually my
Oh
line,
my gosh.
man.
Oh no. Maybe you got to bleep it. I don't know. I don't know how that stuff works. It matters a ton. It matters a ton. So look, I have argued complex cases under federal statutory, constitutional law, state law, in the Colorado Supreme Court and courts of appeals across the country. And when I say argued, I mean literally me arguing, David Seligman at a podium arguing. I'll say I agree with my friend Hetal that it is not principally the role of the Attorney General to be the one arguing these kinds of cases. But what is absolutely the role of the next Attorney General, what has to be the role of the next Attorney General, is understanding how to use the law, to fight for a better future. I want to take a step back and talk to you about surveillance, wages, and prices, which we just discussed earlier. Several years ago, my clients, rideshare drivers across Colorado and the country, Uber and Lyft drivers, were explaining to me how their wages were going down when the company perceived that they were more desperate for work. When they took out an online loan, for example, when they drew money out of their account. That system, that surveillance system has now proliferated across our economy. Right, where the largest corporations in the world can spy on you. If you're searching for an obituary online, they can jack up your airline prices. A nurse applying for a job online may get offered a lower salary if she's been searching for divorce attorneys because the company perceives her to be more desperate for work. I share all of this with you because I've been using the law, along with my colleagues, in bold and new kinds of ways to take on this fight in first in the nation, antitrust and consumer protection litigation, and then showing up in the Capitol here in Colorado, drafting and helped to pass this law that the governor vetoed, unfortunately, our surveillance wage and price prohibition. Using the law to take on the new and scary threats to our democracy and to our economy. And one of my friends, a rideshare driver, a former client of mine, remarked to me, he said, you always tell us, and you share when you're talking about this issue, you always say, rideshare drivers are the canaries in the coal mine of this problem, the canaries in the coal mine of a new future hijacked by the oligarchs, the most powerful corporations in the history of the world. And you gotta stop saying that we're the canaries in the coal mine, he said. Because the canaries died, and we are not going to die. We're gonna live. We're gonna live. We're gonna fight back against these threats to our democracy and our economy. He said, I know we're gonna live because you're our lawyer, right? And we can choose a different future. We are all canaries in a very scary coal mine right now, and we need a lawyer right by our side fighting for us. This job is so important. It is hard to overstate its importance. We've got to be done with the same old musical chair politics in Colorado where political consultants tell us who our governor is supposed to be, who our senator is supposed to be, who our attorney general is supposed to be. Politics fundamentally is about making people's lives better. We can't forget it.
Thank you for saying that. Absolutely agree. The people should pick who's going to represent us, right? Not political operatives. Michael, you mentioned integrity. So this question regards that. The AG Alliance and Republican and Democratic AG associations host what they call educational events, and others might call junkets, at luxury venues with large corporations often footing the bill. The kind of corporations that AGs often sue. Will you participate in any of these organizations? And if you do, how is it not a conflict of interest? Michael?
So for me, this could be a really short answer because I've been district attorney since 2018, and I've been elected 3 times. And throughout my entire time as district attorney, I have an ethical obligation, and I have to report on any gift I receive. So if you got done watching Shaun Boyd's program on Jena Griswold later, and you were still thinking about this talk, and you wanted to look up all the gifts I've received, that wouldn't take you much time, because the number is 0. I will never take gifts. The idea that I would go on a junket is unacceptable to me. I would never do that because it cuts against the integrity of what we're supposed to do as public servants. I'm offered trips frequently. I will never have someone pay for it. It's either the taxpayers not paying for it or I'm paying for it out of my own pocket. I'm not going to accept that kind of money from someone because I don't want anybody to ever think that they have access to me. When you think about the decisions we make, we're going to be asked decisions on fracking, for example. No one should ever question the integrity of my decision because I went on a oil and gas funded trip to fill in the blank. I will never do that. I've never done it. That's why I've earned trust all across the state of Colorado, because I've always fought for justice and done it with integrity. That's why I have endorsements from the former U.S. attorneys, district attorneys from both parties. Even though there's a Republican DA running for Attorney General, I have his colleagues supporting my campaign. Police chiefs, sheriffs, legislators, and community leaders, because I have a track record of leading with integrity. So this is an easy one for me, and it's an easy one for you to check on, because you could just go look on the public records of how many gifts I've accepted. It is literally 0. I think anytime we see a Shaun Boyd show, I don't know if you've done one yourself, but about these junkets,
I have done one. You can look it up.
I'm
It's
tempted
got like
to
2
ask
million views, so,
Oh,
yeah.
well, there you go. So that's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
2 million views. 2 million people concerned.
Maybe.
What's that?
Close to.
Close to. Shaun, pillar of integrity herself. Close to. But the point is this. 2 million Coloradans, or thereabouts, concerned about government and integrity. That's why they're watching Shaun Boyd's show about it. That's why, for me, the answer will always be, I am not accepting it. And to steal my friend David's line, hell no. Thank you.
You did it. There you go. We love it.
David, you want to take this?
Hell no. We don't like junkets. We don't like junkets, whether they're funded by oil and gas, whether they're funded by big tech interests. I'll point out, I just want to highlight how corrosive the corporate money in particular flowing into these organizations can be, and also highlight some of the complexity of this answer. It is just frankly far too often the way that we do business now in our politics is to accept, for example, that even at the Democratic AGs Association, that we've got like DoorDash and Uber contributing money, and Amazon, hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars, and then gaining access to attorney generals at these kinds of convenings. I want to be a loud and outspoken advocate against that kind of influence in our politics, including among the state AGs. Absolutely. Not when my clients, rideshare drivers, right here in Colorado, are having trouble feeding their kids. Right? No, we can't accept a system where Uber gets to sponsor some of these convenings and then show up and engage with AGs. We can't accept a world where Amazon gets to pump hundreds of thousands of dollars, again, even into sometimes the Democratic AGs Association. And meanwhile, my clients across Colorado, Amazon delivery drivers, again, are urinating in bottles in order to meet Amazon's quotas. We cannot accept that kind of world. I do want to be careful in responding to this question, though, to highlight that that cannot mean cutting off collaboration with state AGs across the country, especially when that collaboration is absolutely essential in the fight to take on Donald Trump, the fight to take on the oppressive threat of corporate power in our democracy and in our economy. I've worked very closely with state AGs for years at taking on junk fees, burying renters, and going after the use of non-compete agreements, trapping workers in jobs, preventing them from earning a decent living and obtaining fair treatment at work. So collaboration with state AGs is absolutely essential, and I don't want to foreclose engaging with AGs around these issues, but what I can promise you is I will be the loudest, most outspoken advocate in the history of attorneys general across the country against the corrosive force of money in our politics, including in state AGs associations.
Thank you. Hetal?
So I agree with a lot of what has been said, but I want to provide to you that I have a real track record and experience here, and I want to tell you two things about that. So number one, anytime, so when you're a federal prosecutor, you are subject to a whole different set of rules with respect to ethics and transparency, and so like Michael, my life is out there. In fact, as someone who investigated public corruption amongst officials, which would include other folks like me, right, this is incredibly important to me. Number two, though, I think it is critical to make sure that we understand that power, money, and influence shows up in a lot of different ways. And so one of the things that I care a lot about is the fact that so much of the expert scholarship that we use as lawyers, as witnesses, and whatever else in court is funded by a lot of these organizations that then appear in front of your office when you're Attorney General or in any other office. And so thinking through and disentangling this access, whether it's a conference or a junket, or the quiet placement of certain researchers and dollars who then are quoted back to you, that's all about power, money, and influence, and it is something that I have expertise and experience in taking on. Look, you don't file cases and win cases against Google, Apple, Ticketmaster, Visa, without hundreds of millions of dollars being lobbied against you in terms of trying to influence your outcomes. And so as your next Attorney General, you don't have to take my word for the fact that I will be loud and vociferous and will continue to fight this. You have a real track record of first of their kind, market moving, front page of the New York Times, Wall Street Journal, whatever newspaper you're looking at, cases, and you've seen that I've stood up and fought against that kind of influence. But the other thing that I want to tell you is that the Attorney General actually has the opportunity to meaningfully change this. Because I agree with David that collaboration really matters, but collaboration doesn't have to look like plug and play what we've seen historically over the years. When I became the Biden-Harris administration's senior political appointee leading antitrust litigation for all of America with respect to the DOJ, we had an open question around which events we would attend and who we would give access in terms of hearing from us what our enforcement priorities were, what we cared about, how we were thinking about certain legal questions, right? Suddenly, all of these cloistered spaces where people had to pay $1,000 a ticket or whatever else, I had real concerns with that. And so we, as a leadership team, said, how do we make sure that anyone in America has access to how we think about these issues? Again, this isn't like a promise, this is a track record. And so that means that if there was an enforcers conference that traditionally had been funded by private organizations, we stood up an alternative parallel conference that gave people access to their enforcers to be able to ask these questions. So this issue isn't just about a junket, in my opinion. It is about making sure that we understand where power, money, and influence show up. Sometimes it's in the form of access at events like this that don't end up being open. Sometimes it's in the form of scholarship and expertise that's used in the courtroom to fight. And other times it's simple pay for play. And I just want to make sure that we're not only focused on pay for play, but we're thinking about all of those other things and making sure that your next Attorney General is creative and thoughtful and intentional about where she shows up and who she gives information in terms of access and insight into what we're going to do as a state of Colorado.
Thank you. This is just a quick follow-up to that. So kind of a yes or no. If elected, you will decide whether to sue, investigate, or settle with companies that have millions on the line. Will you pledge to forego the knowing acceptance or to return campaign donations from businesses and their law firms or lawyers while their matter is pending before your office, and perhaps for a reasonable period of time after it concludes?
Yes.
Hetal?
Yes, I think the ethical rules really matter and will guide that answer.
Yes, definitely.
All right. Current AG, Phil Weiser, is running for governor, and his willingness or unwillingness to join multi-state lawsuits has become an issue in the race. Why do you think there are so few cases in the 10th Circuit Court of Appeals? I mean, he's joined or filed roughly 65 lawsuits. And if elected, would you seek to file more cases here in Colorado courts? Also, how would you overcome federal preemption? Lost track again. David?
Yeah. So there are some cases that have been brought in the District of Colorado and in the 10th Circuit, especially the cases that have been brought exclusively by the Colorado Attorney General. For example, the state's exceptionally important effort to fight back against Donald Trump's pressure campaign against Colorado to try to coerce us and the governor into commuting Tina Peters' sentence. And there are a few other cases that have been filed here in the District of Colorado and in the 10th Circuit. I think the reasons that we don't see more of them have to do with a bunch of different things, including what other state attorneys general we're collaborating with, and where it is most strategic for us to file that litigation in light of case law at the Court of Appeals level. And some Court of Appeals, some circuits have more developed case law on some of these questions than the 10th Circuit. With respect to the next question was about federal preemption.
Preemption, yeah, right, standing and making the case stick.
Yeah, I think that there will be different kinds of preemption questions that arise in every case, different kinds of standing questions that arise in every single case, and very often these are just these efforts will just be the efforts that I see every single day throughout my legal career. When you attempt to hold powerful interests accountable, they will use everything they can to avoid accountability. to use every doctrine, to weaponize it, to immunize themselves, to maintain a system where the wealthy and powerful can play by a different set of rules. For example, that Geo Group case that I've been talking about, the one that we filed back in 2014, the reason it's taken us so long to ultimately now be on the verge of trial in the District of Colorado is that the Trump administration attempted to argue that some doctrine that was at the time extremely underutilized, called derivative sovereign immunity, that it effectively allowed the Geo Group, this private prison company, to violate the rights of people in Colorado purely because they are a government contractor. And in several Court of Appeals arguments that, again, that I have done directly, David Seligman standing up in court, we've pushed back against that argument, highlighted that this was never the intent of that doctrine, derivative sovereign immunity, never the intent of the Supreme Court in a case called United States versus Yearsley, and we ultimately prevailed. That's what a lot of these fights are going to look like, right, is to use the law in bold and new ways in order to take on the absurd efforts of the Trump administration and others to immunize their conduct from legal scrutiny.
Thank you. Hetal?
So I love this question because it's a strategy question about how we win, right? All right, so number one, why are so few cases filed in Colorado? So let me take a step back. There have been 105 cases filed by Democratic coalition of attorneys general against the Trump administration. The state of Colorado has joined 65. Each of those cases is pending in federal court. They concern federal claims. A lot of those reasons as to why we're part of 65 and not the 105 relate to whether the impact is felt here in Colorado, which is, I believe, the appropriate test. But second, just technical legal reasons around whether there's jurisdiction and venue and appropriate contacts here in Colorado. So I will tell you, in my last job leading the country's antitrust litigation for the Department of Justice, I had to make this decision about where to file certain cases. And I was someone who believed that it was not enough to do what the Antitrust Division had historically done, which is to file all their cases in the District of Washington, D.C. And so for the first time, in a very long time in American history, I filed the Ticketmaster case in New York. Guess what one of the live music capitals of America is? New York City, right? The case I filed against RealPage in terms of algorithmic collusion and using AI to jack up people's rents. We filed that in the Middle District of North Carolina because it had an outsized impact in terms of the impact of that collusion on rent there in particular. And when I filed the case against Visa, that went back to New York for a different reason. When we filed the case against Google, that ended up in the Eastern District of Virginia because that was a place where a lot of federal contractors were impacted. And so I share this with you to say two things. Number one, the decision to make about how and where to file a case is a deeply strategic and thoughtful decision about the state of the case law, what the capacity of the bench is in terms of the busyness in bench, because you want to make sure you're not filing a case somewhere where it's going to be 5 years until you get a trial, right? And then third, and critically, do you have a connection? Can you meet the legal standard to get that connection to Colorado? And so that would explain in many circumstances why the coalition of AGs has filed the cases where they have filed them, and I am well suited on day one to make those strategic decisions in partnership with those AGs. And I should tell you, we've been talking a lot about partnership with other attorneys general offices. We talked about the Attorney General for Washington, Nick Brown, a former federal prosecutor. We've talked about filing cases in other locations. I will tell you that as part of my last job, in addition to choosing where we were going to be filing those cases, it was who are we filing those cases with? And so when we sued Google, when we took that case to trial, we had 48 attorneys general on board. Imagine building that bipartisan coalition today. Second, when we filed Ticketmaster, brought 40 attorneys general to that battle. And when the Department of Justice tried to settle out that case from under the American people in the dark of night, it was the state AGs, the same coalition that I helped to build, that finished the job and succeeded for the American people. And so that's the piece about where and how these cases are filed. But second, on the preemption point, there are two kinds of preemption. Express, which means Congress says no states, you can't do any of this, which doesn't happen that often because you can't usually get any congressman to sign off on that, although it happens from time to time. And second, implied preemption. And that's where the battle is. It's all about implied preemption in this particular moment. Traditional areas that you see this in, and I want to be really upfront with you, is immigration policy, right? And so when you have supremacy clause and implied preemption, we are going to have fight after fight after fight about state and federal power. And let's be clear, I agree with David. These are fights that we have to win. It is when everyone throws the spaghetti at the wall to see what sticks. But you want to make sure that your next attorney general, in the moment to win the battle that's 6 inches in front of her face, doesn't then create law such that in the future, when it's the federal government that has the national right to an abortion enshrined in the Constitution, as we should, that it's not the state of Alabama coming back and saying, actually, we are allowed to legislate in this space as well. And so that is the gift or the promise or the difficulty with respect to preemption issues that I want to be very upfront with you about, is that the state of Colorado has to be careful in terms of how they craft the cases that we bring and the preemption issues that we argue, so that that preemption power in the federal government or in any particular state does not compromise our civil rights. That is not a question of ideology, it is a question of experience and skill, and I believe I'm the right person to be able to make that judgment.
Thank you. Michael?
So I agree with much of what Hetal and David have said. And to me, to crystallize it, it's mostly about strategy. If you're going to fight Donald Trump, you have to win those fights. So that's largely what goes into those decisions about where to file those cases. That's the experience I bring as your next Attorney General. For example, when I was out in the community, and I do a ton of community outreach, hearing 4-Star Realty stole my security deposit. 4-Star Realty won't return my security deposit. 4-Star Realty ripped off my son and his roommates. I teamed up with Phil Weiser in the Attorney General's office, and we brought the first of its kind civil suit. But there was a conversation about where to bring that case, civil or criminal, and what court to bring it to. But because we made the right decisions, we were able to get 4-Star Realty to pay $1 million to all the tenants they ripped off. And also to adopt a template and a model for landlords and realty companies around the state of Colorado to follow at a time where people are struggling to put food on the table and struggling to pay rent. We should not allow any realty company or landlord to rip people off on top of that. That's where strategy comes in. So a lot of it's about strategy. And if you ask Phil Weiser, how is it that he's been able to decide what lawsuits to join, I think his criteria has been the right one, which is cases where the Trump administration is violating the rule of law and harming Colorado. That will be the exact criteria I use as your next Attorney General. When has Trump violated the rule of law, and when is it actually harming Colorado? That's the key part of it. And having spoken with Phil, I could tell you that the partnerships with the other attorneys general from around the country are absolutely key. That's why before I launched the campaign, I reached out to the Democratic AGs Association and sat down with them before I even started this campaign. It's why I've talked with attorneys general from around the country, so that those alliances, those partnerships will be in place on day one when I take office. But it's also about taking Trump to court when it's the right thing to do. And you're going to hear me say a word that I've said before, which is integrity. I will never take Trump to court just to get my face on MSNBC. I will only do it when it's the right thing for the people of Colorado. I've been going to court for 30 years saying I'm here on behalf of the people and fighting for justice and winning those fights. That requires us bringing those fights against Trump when it's the right thing to do. So it's about strategy, it's about collaboration with other AGs, and it's about standing up for what's right for Colorado, and I'll keep doing that as your next AG. Thank you.
Thank you. I think we're probably out of time, are we? Andrew? Allie? You do? Okay. Well,
What happened at night?
yeah. So here's my last question. You all have appeared together at many forums and debates over the last few months. And you appear to generally like and respect each other. You know, David, you talked about your dad, and I think about when he passed away and the support that they gave you. My mom, my father-in-law passed away in the last month. So I, first of all, just sincerely, I feel for you right now. But I know the importance of having friends and support around you during a time like that. You are friends who are competing for the same job, however. A job that none of you may get if all of you remain in this race. I am sure that people have talked to you about this. I am sure I'm not the first one to bring this up. Jena Griswold is, as I've said before, widely considered the front runner, whether she is or not. So will any of you commit to withdraw or endorse someone else on this stage? And will you endorse Jena Griswold if she does win the primary, knowing how much experience she has or lacks for Attorney General. Have you talked about it amongst the three of you?
Is this the last question?
Yes.
It's a doozy.
I know. I have about 8 minutes, I think. You know. I'd like you to address it honestly, because I hear about this all the time. There is concern.
I'm happy to just chime in and say first, in response to your prompt, I have I appreciate what you shared. I have a ton of respect for my colleagues up on the stage here. My daughter once saw, this was several months ago, but my daughter once saw me talking to Michael and said, "Oh, is that your new coworker?" And I thought, yeah, maybe something like that. It's kind of a weird kind of co-working relationship, but maybe something like that. What I can share is that all of us care very, very deeply about the future of Colorado. Care very, very deeply about the Attorney General's office. And the other thing that I'll say, Shaun, with all due respect, which is that I don't think any of us should fall into the sort of cynical politics of assuming that things are going to work out always the way that the pundits say they will. The decision about who the next Attorney General should be here in Colorado belongs to the people of Colorado. And everywhere I go around the state, that is a decision, a sacred one, that people in this state are taking very, very seriously. I think people in Colorado are ready for new voices in Democratic Party politics. I think they're ready for a new kind of politics, again, that's not about getting on MSNBC, right? That's about making people's lives better. That's what people want. They want a government and a politics that can deliver for them. And I've got total trust that the people of Colorado will make that happen. Now, with respect to your question about endorsing Secretary Griswold if she wins the nomination, and obviously I'm running against her. I hope she doesn't. That's apparent. I hope I win the nomination. But if she wins the nomination, will I hesitate to endorse her? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. I want to be crystal clear about that. It is essential that we elect an Attorney General who is willing to stand up to the Trump administration, an Attorney General who is willing to take on these really important fights for the future of our democracy. I also know from speaking to Secretary Griswold that that she's someone who cares very deeply about working families and using the law to protect the working class here in Colorado. I do not think that she should win this nomination. That should be apparent because I'm up on the stage. But I would not hesitate to endorse her in the general election if she did win the nomination.
Hetal?
Yeah, I share a lot of the same thoughts here as David, but I want to start from a place of, as I understood it, the loss of your father-in-law is in particular very, very recent, and given that,
In the last month.
yeah, showing up for our work selves, given what happens in our lives, is something that I've seen on this campaign trail with both of the gentlemen seated next to me on the other side, and there's life, and I just want to acknowledge that and credit that. Thank you for being here. Okay, so let's get down to brass tacks. I share David's view that the ability of voters to make a decision about the person who reflects their values and their vision for the future matters a whole lot. And there are two observations that I would offer with respect to that. Number one, I think you can hear from my comments up here today and my past track record that I have been, and this organization is a perfect one to make this point to, given your history and your lineage and your contributions. I think that the access to the right to vote is not just at the ballot box. It's all the way along the way in terms of having options, about not coronating people, about not making decisions that are rooted in sometimes junk science with respect to which ways elections are going to turn out, because we see that that is incorrect often. So that's point number one, is that the right to vote isn't just at the ballot box, it's also the ability to meaningfully have choices along the way. Second, and this is very near and dear to my heart, if we engaged in the kind of thinking that is sort of like, all right, everyone huddle up together and like, let's figure out who has the best shot or whatever else, real talk, people like me would never run for office. I am a first-time candidate. I am someone who was told by a political kingmaker here in Colorado weeks before I jumped into the race, when I was being encouraged to do it and I was thinking about doing it, and I thought, you know, we have a great landscape of candidates, you know, what do I offer to this conversation? And I was like, I have a particular perspective and experience that matters. And so this person, though, said to me, you seem like a bright girl, but you're a brown woman with a funny name. Colorado's not ready for that, and oh, by the way, Asian Americans can't raise money. I share that with you to tell you that this kind of thinking that motivates these questions has always been the reason that doesn't matter if you're a White House presidential, administration appointee that's got this experience and track record. Like, in this moment, that is what this person saw. And so I think it is really important to push back on a dialogue that's around this, because I think it just continues to reaffirm and cement an ideology that has prevented communities of color, first-generation Americans, immigrants. Like, we're all talking about these issues about what immigrants in America face. I can tell you, I can't take the brown off my skin. I come to this from a real experience. And if we adopted an ideology like you're talking about, and this is not you talking about it, like, it's something that we do hear a lot about. No, we do hear, I want to be really open and honest and vulnerable about this with you. And to say, if that were the case, then you just wouldn't have people that have my story, that have my experience in these races. And, you know, I think that would be a real tragedy.
Thank you. Michael?
So I want to start, Shaun, by saying what I said earlier, which is how deeply sorry I am to you and your family for your loss. And Shaun shared earlier, before we got started, that she got back at 2:30 in the morning last night. But she showed up here today because it's really important. That's why you're here today. I think a legitimate question for Jena Griswold is why she doesn't attend these candidate forums. I just think that's a legitimate question to ask, given what's at stake. And I'm not trying to go negative, I'm just trying to be real about who's in the room. So you have Shaun Boyd landing at 2:30 last night and coming here today, which I appreciate. But she's an incredible reporter who doesn't need to be here. She's here because this race is so critically important. And I appreciate that very much, because it's about showing up. The other thing that's not gotten enough attention, quite frankly, is that the Republicans have put forth a credible candidate for Attorney General. He's the elected district attorney from El Paso, and Teller, yes, thank you. And he prosecuted the Club Q shooter, he's a military veteran, and he has a good record as a district attorney. And he will never once, never, not at all, take Donald Trump to court. We can't afford to lose this election to the Republicans. I worry that that's possible. I worry that we may lose what Phil Weiser and other AGs around the country have done in standing up and fighting for our rights. That's why I'm running for Attorney General, because the fight is on right now, and that's critically important. And we have to put the best interest of Colorado first. And I think that's key. So if you're moved by Shaun's question, if you think Shaun might be right, you have until June 30th to make a difference. Ballots are coming out June 8th. June 30th is the election. You spreading the word to your friends, you volunteering for one of our campaigns, you helping with a contribution, you can make a difference between now and June 30th about how this plays out. Whether Shaun is right or not about Jena Griswold being a front runner, we are here because we believe that elections matter, votes matter, your involvement matters. That's why you're here. And it's critically important that we put the best interest of Colorado first. I love this state. I chose to move here. We had a good life in New York. And we'd come out here and I'd do these trail races, and I'm an ultra runner, and Antonio and I would be back at the airport and we'd look at one another and I'd say, why are we going back to New York City? I said that a lot, by the way. We kept going back until I got an offer from the Attorney General's office. So having worked there and been a leader there, I know from firsthand experience the importance of that office in standing up and fighting for all Coloradans. It's also why when I started this campaign, I committed to traveling the entire state. I have traveled on weekends alone 24,000 miles since starting this campaign, because being the people's lawyer means showing up. So when I go out across the state and I talk about water and environment and civil rights and abortion access and public safety and consumer protection, the scams and frauds, including in healthcare and housing that we see, and the role of the Attorney General, I'm traveling the state every weekend. Because to me, this mission, this campaign, is the moment we need to stand and fight for Colorado. That's what I've done my entire career. And because I travel the state, and because I've done work all around the state, I now have the endorsement of the Durango Herald. And because I have a proven track record as a fighter and a leader, the Denver Post endorsed my campaign this morning. I'm running for Attorney General because the fight is on and I love this state. That's why I'm here. And I'd be honored to have your support. Thank you.
Thank you. That's it. I will just say, you know, of course, Channel 4, we don't endorse candidates, but I think we're lucky to have 3 candidates with your level of thoughtfulness, credentials, experience, truly. Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Thanks so much for being here.
Thank you.